I'm not sure. I don't know what was going on there. Okay, and then Jeremiah 22, starting in verse 8 here. No, wait, I did that. 9, 10 actually. I kind of got a little mixed up here on this break in the video. Okay, so the context that was set for us at the beginning of chapter 21 was that Zedekiah, the last king of Judah, sent these messengers to Jeremiah, probably while Jeremiah was in prison at the beginning or sometime during apparently the final siege of Jerusalem by Babylon. And so they're coming to him and asking for help. Now, they weren't doing this before. We read about chapters 18, 19, and 20. They weren't doing this before, but they are now. Now, he gave them this message. He gave them an answer in the rest of chapter 21, and possibly in chapter 22. But it does seem as though here in chapter 22, whether at the beginning of the chapter or somewhere during this time, we kind of shift away from the context set for us in 21 about them going to him, presumably while he's in prison. The actual chapter 21 doesn't say that, but we find out later in the book that he was confined in Judah's last days, which seems to be what's happening here in chapter 21 is the last days of Judah. And it doesn't. However, it seems as though after we get done with that initial response to the messengers, we start blending that together here in the written account of the prophet Jeremiah. We start blending that together with other messages that he had spoken during his ministry. So the stuff we read here in 22 and 23 and 24, I don't think we should necessarily, or 22 and 23, 24 definitely is not. 22 and 23, I don't think we should necessarily assume that this is all part of the same conversation that we read about in 21, where he is speaking back to the messengers who came to ask of him from the king. I think we're now kind of we've transitioned into more of a general sermon, message that he spoke a lot during his ministry that is being included here, because he's making the point about judgment against basically everybody in Judah, essentially. And we're starting off here by talking about the kings. And he's talking about pretty much all the kings after Josiah. I've gone over this before. We always need to... This is confusing, so we need to remember this, because this is easy to lose track of. King Josiah was the last good king of Judah. He died in battle against Pharaoh Necho. Pharaoh Necho wasn't even seeking to fight him. He was going out to do something else, and Josiah, for reasons that are not explained, decided to intercept him and fight him, and he lost and died. Pharaoh Necho apparently continued on. When he died, the people took his son, Shallum, and made him king, and he became Jehoahaz, King Jehoahaz. Necho apparently did whatever he wanted to do, or else he failed at it, in fighting against the Babylonians who were fighting the Assyrians. He went up to help the Assyrians in their last-ditch effort to ward off the Babylonians, and that failed, for whatever the reason. Then he came back down to Egypt. On his way, he stopped in at Judah, essentially conquered Judah, and he removed Jehoahaz as king, took him prisoner back to Egypt with him, and put another son of Josiah, Jehoiakim, on the throne. Actually, his name was Eliakim, and gave him the throne name Jehoiakim. And that was only 3 months after Josiah had died. So after Josiah's death, the people make his son Shallum king and call him Jehoahaz. Then 3 months later, Necho comes back through Judah on his way back to Egypt. He doesn't like Jehoahaz, probably because he was anti-Egyptian in his policy, I don't know. So he captures him and takes him back to Egypt, where he's going to die. He never comes back to Judah, and sets another son of Josiah, Eliakim, on the throne, and gives him the throne name Jehoiakim. Jehoiakim then reigns for 11 years, and he eventually dies. It's a little unclear exactly how he dies. The best estimate, if you put all together all the accounts of his death in the scriptures, the best estimation seems to be that he was captured by Babylon and was going to be taken to Babylon as a prisoner, but died on the way, and they just kind of threw him out wherever. I don't know. It's not really clear. That seems to be what is being described in the various accounts of Jehoiakim's death, but we don't really have a clear-cut account of his death, so we don't really know for sure. And then his son Jehoiachin, Jeconiah, becomes king, and he's only 18 years old when he becomes king. And he's the grandson of Josiah, the son of Jehoiakim. And 3 months later, he's taken captive to Babylon, along with his mother and some other people, to Babylon. This is in 597 BC. And that's a big one. That's a big one. We're going to be reading about that particular exile a lot. That's in 597 BC. The young king at the time, Jeconiah, had been only reigning for 3 months. He's only 18 years old. He and his mother and the court officials and a lot of the top level of people in Judah and Jerusalem are taken captive. The kingdom itself doesn't fall at that time, but a lot of the best of the people there, at least in terms of just skill and ability, are taken away, including the king, the young king, and his mother. And that's only after 3 months of him being on the throne. So we have one king who reigned for 3 months and was taken to Egypt and died. One king who reigned for 11 years and died. One king who reigned for 3 months and was taken to Babylon and died many years later. And then last king, Zedekiah, is put on the throne by the king of Babylon. He's another son of Josiah. So we have 3 sons of Josiah and 1 grandson of Josiah. He is the uncle of the previous king, Jeconiah. And his name is Zedekiah, his throne name is Zedekiah, and he reigns for another 11 years, and it's in his day when the city finally falls. I say this over and over again because A, it's confusing. Okay, this is something that is hard to keep track of. Like, you do need to keep track of this because it is weird and confusing. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of comings and goings during this time. And also B, because it's important. Okay? This is the context of the times that are happening here. And Jeremiah would have lived through all of this. Jeremiah's ministry began when Josiah was still king, and it continued after the exile, after the fall, and even beyond that. So he would have seen all of this. He would have been in the city for all of it. He was in the city while it happened. Okay, and that in particular is important here for Jeremiah 22 and 23, in particular 22, because the message that we're going to be reading here is about all of these guys, all of these kings that succeeded Josiah, and even Josiah himself is going to be mentioned, are going to be talked about in this section. It's impossible, I think, to say precisely when he gave these individual messages. He seems to be speaking in the present tense, or maybe even the future tense, out of all of them. Well, they all fell and died at different times, and from what I can tell, they weren't all reigning on the throne at the same time. Now, there may have been a small window of time in which Jehoiakim was king, and his brother and predecessor, Jehoahaz, was still alive as a prisoner in Egypt, and his son, Jeconiah, as a small boy, may have been a co-regent with him, appointed to be king someday after Jehoiakim's own death. That's possible. There may have been a window of time in which that was true. So you would have had one king of Judah as a captive in Egypt, one king of Judah actually reigning in Judah at the time. That would be Jehoiakim. And then another king of Judah, Jehoiachin, Jehoiakim's son, very young son, who may have been appointed as the future ruler and was in Jerusalem still at the time. That may have been true. There may have been a point in time when all 3 of those things would have been true at once. But it's very difficult. This is a very, very difficult. It's difficult to pin down the time frame of this section. He's going to be talking about the kings of Judah, and in particular the sons of Josiah and grandson. There's one who was a grandson. So I don't know when he gave this message. This doesn't seem to be chronologically happening at the same time as what we read about in chapter 21. Because in chapter 21, this is at the very end of Zedekiah's reign, during the last siege of Jerusalem by Babylon. Jeremiah is confined in the temple court or whatever, the courtyard, unable to move and not free to run around and move around on his own. and Jehoiakim would have already been dead by this point. And so this section doesn't seem to be taking place chronologically at the same time as chapter 21. So my guess is that this material was spoken at some point before that, and it's being inserted now because it fits thematically with the statement of judgment that Jeremiah is speaking against the kings of Judah. I wish I didn't have to spend all this time explaining this. It's just how it is, okay? Some of this stuff is difficult. I spent 10 minutes here just trying to talk about what we're going to be reading here in a moment, and you just kind of have to do that sometimes. So, we're going to start here in Jeremiah 22, and we're going to start reading in verse 10. Do not weep for the dead king, or mourn his loss. That'd be Josiah, the good king, the last good king of Judah, who died in battle, unnecessarily so, against Pharaoh Necho in the valley of Megiddo. Armageddon, actually, by the way. That's where that was, in 609 BC. Do not weep for him, or mourn his loss. Rather, weep bitterly for him who is exiled. That'd be Jehoahaz, the son and the immediate successor of Josiah. He was captured by Pharaoh Necho on Necho's way back from battle after killing Josiah, and he was taken to Egypt, and he died there. I don't know how long he lived in captivity in Egypt. I don't know, but however long it was, a year, 10 years, 20 years, I don't know. However long it was, he never returned. He never got out of captivity. He never returned. He died there. Weep bitterly for him who is exiled, because he will never return, nor see his native land again. He apparently was still alive when this message was given. He was a captive in Egypt, and he was going to stay that way until his death. For this is what the Lord says about Shallum, the son of Josiah. Shallum's the guy who was also called Jehoahaz. Shallum apparently was his birth name, and Jehoahaz is his king name. For this is what the Lord says about Shallum, son of Josiah, who succeeded his father as king of Judah, that has gone from this place. He will never return. He will die in the place where they have led him captive. He will not see this land again. Woe to him who... Now, this is not Jehoahaz. We're talking about somebody else now. Woe to him who builds his palace by unrighteousness, his upper rooms by injustice, making his countrymen work for nothing, not paying them for their labor. He says, I will build myself a great palace with spacious upper rooms. So he makes large windows in it, panels it with cedar, and decorates it in red. This is Jehoiakim. This is the guy that was put on the throne by Egypt's Pharaoh Necho after Necho seized Jehoahaz and took him prisoner. This is the second king after Josiah. He reigned for 11 years. He was a bad guy, and apparently just sought to profit himself at the expense of anything else. They were supposed to pay their workers. I don't get any impression that there was an exception for the king. Deuteronomy 24, starting in verse 14. Do not take advantage of a hired man, or one who is poor and needy, whether he is a brother Israelite or an alien living in one of your towns. Pay him his wages each day before sunset, because he is poor and is counting on it. Otherwise he may cry to the Lord against you, and you will be guilty of sin. So the worker was supposed to get paid. And he also said elsewhere they weren't supposed to enslave their fellow Israelite. Oh boy, where did that go? Did I have that? Do I have that written down in one of my citations? Oops, wrong. There. Yeah, there it is. They were not supposed to enslave their fellow Israelites, or at least not forcefully. You could sell yourself into slavery. In chapter Deuteronomy 15, verse 12, it says, if a fellow Hebrew, man or woman, sells himself to you and serves you 6 years, and you must let him go in the 7th year. Unless he decides to stay with you. But that's his choice. That's his decision. You can't force a fellow Hebrew to be your slave. Whether from the beginning, he can choose to sell himself to you, and he can choose to stay as your slave even after the end of his 7 years of slavery. But you cannot force your fellow Hebrew to be a slave. They are supposed to pay their workers, and Jehoiakim was not doing that. He may not have been able to. I mean, he may have not been able to pay his workers because he was spending all of his money paying off Egypt. But in that case, he shouldn't have undertaken this expansive building project for his own glory, his own vanity. Does it make you a king to have more and more cedar? Did not your father, that's Josiah again, have food and drink? He did what was right and just, so all went well with him. He defended the cause of the poor and the needy, and so all went well. Is that not what it means to know me, declares the Lord? But your eyes and your heart are set only on dishonest gain, on shedding innocent blood, and on oppression and extortion. Therefore, this is what the Lord says about Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. This is a guy that was put on the throne by Pharaoh Necho after Necho took Jehoahaz, the prisoner, back to Egypt. He reigned for 11 years, from 608 to 597 BC. It's unclear exactly how he died, but he didn't have an honorable death, as we're going to read about here. This is what the Lord says about Jehoiakim, son of Josiah, king of Judah. They will not mourn for him. Alas, my brother, alas, my sister. They will not mourn for him. Alas, my master, alas, his splendor. He will have the burial of a donkey, dragged away and thrown outside the gates of Jerusalem. It appears as though he was captured by Babylon during a period of unrest amongst the nations, and was being taken to Babylon, but died along the way and was thrown out somewhere. It seems like it, although we really don't know for sure. Go up to Lebanon and cry out. Let your voice be heard in Bashan. Cry out from Abiram, wherever that is, for all your allies are crushed. I warned you when you felt secure, but you said, I will not listen. This has been your way since your youth. He's talking about Israel as a whole now. He's talking about the country as a whole now. You have not obeyed me. The wind will drive all your shepherds away. Shepherds are an imagery of the leaders. You know, David was a shepherd before he was a king. And Jesus talks a lot about being the good shepherd. A lot of the imagery about the ideal king comes from this shepherd imagery. So when you hear the word shepherds in the Old Testament, in these poetic passages, it refers to the kings and the other rulers of the people. So the wind will drive all your shepherds away, and your allies, those are the nations around them they're trying to team up with to fight against Babylon, will go into exile. We'll read about that later on. Babylon's going to take out all these countries, not just Jerusalem and Judah. All the nations around them. They're all teaming up with each other against Babylon, and Babylon's going to beat them all. We're going to read about that later. Then you'll be ashamed and disgraced because of all your wickedness. You who live in Lebanon. Now that could be a reference to the palace, which was made of wood from Lebanon. So he may not really be talking about him living in Lebanon, which wasn't even in their territory. He's probably talking about the palace of the forest of Lebanon, which is what they called the king's palace, since it was made of wood from Lebanon. You who live in Lebanon, who are nestled in cedar buildings, how you will groan when pains come upon you, pain like that of a woman in labor. As surely as I was, that's Jehoiakim, okay, that was number 2 in the list of the last 4 kings. He was the one who reigned 11 years and died under mysterious, dishonorable circumstances, and we don't really even know exactly what happened to him. As surely as I live, declares the Lord, even if you, Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, this is the third guy now. This is Jehoiakim's son. This is Josiah's grandson. He was only 18 years old when he became king. He seems to have been assigned as a co-regent with his father when he was only 8, probably to ensure a line of succession in case something happened to Jehoiakim. He only reigned for 3 months after Jehoiakim died, he was on the throne for 3 months, and he was captured and taken into exile to Babylon, and he stayed there and died there. We do eventually read later on that many years later he was released from prison. He did not leave Babylon, but he was released from prison. So he didn't spend his entire rest of his life in a dungeon, but he did spend the rest of his life in Babylon. He never returned to Judah. He was the last living member of the royal line of David, which is why there's a lot of emphasis placed on him. He was only 18 when he was captured. He spent many years in a Babylonian prison, was eventually released, although he stayed in Babylon until his death, and he was the last living member of the royal line of David. Even of you, Jeconiah, son of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, were a signet ring on my right hand. That's the royal seal of the king. I would still pull you off. I will hand you over to those who seek your life, those you fear, to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and to the Babylonians. I will hurl you and the mother who gave you birth into another country, where neither of you was born, and there you both will die. You will never come back to the land you long to return to. We read about this in the historical books. Let's just go ahead and read that again to just refresh our memories. Second Chronicles 36. Jeconiah, Jehoiachin, was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months and 10 days. Very exact. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord. He's a teenager. Most teenagers do evil in the eyes of the Lord. In the spring, King Nebuchadnezzar sent for him and brought him to Babylon, together with articles of value from the temple of the Lord. And he made Jehoiachin, or Jeconiah's uncle, Zedekiah, king over Judah and Jerusalem. That's the chronicler's account. Here is the king writer's account. If I can get the pages to flip for me. 2 Kings 24, verse 8. Jeconiah was 18 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 3 months. His mother's name was Nehushta, daughter of Elnathan. She was from Jerusalem. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, just as his father had done. At that time, the officers of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, advanced on Jerusalem and laid siege to it. And Nebuchadnezzar himself came up to the city while his officers were besieging it. Jeconiah, king of Judah, his mother, his attendants, his nobles, and his officials all surrendered to him. In the 8th year of the reign of the king of Babylon, he took Jeconiah prisoner. As the Lord had declared, Nebuchadnezzar removed all the treasures from the temple of the Lord and from the royal palace, and took away all the gold articles that Solomon, king of Israel, had made for the temple of the Lord. He carried into exile all Jerusalem, all the officers and fighting men, and all the craftsmen and artisans, a total of 10,000. Only the poorest people of the land were left. Nebuchadnezzar took Jeconiah captive to Babylon. He also took from Jerusalem to Babylon the king's mother, Nehushta, his wives, his officials, and the leading men of the land. The king of Babylon also deported to Babylon the entire force of 7,000 fighting men, strong and fit for war, and 1,000 craftsmen and artisans. He made Mattaniah, Jeconiah's uncle, king in his place, and changed his name to Zedekiah. So that's what Jeremiah is talking about here. It seems he's talking about this in the future tense, as though at this moment in time this hasn't happened yet. So clearly this section is written. It's being written as though it sounds as if it's being spoken before this happened. That was in 597 BC. Now, at the beginning of chapter 21, we're reading about Zedekiah, the last king, during the besiege of Jerusalem, which happened at the very, very end in 586 BC or so. So this section here seems to has been spoken at least 10 years before that, when Jeconiah still had not been captured. So this section here in 22 is not chronologically linked with the account at the beginning of chapter 21. So I will hand you, Jeconiah, over to those who seek your life, those you fear, to Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and to the Babylonians. I will hurl you and the mother who gave you birth into another country, where neither of you was born, and there you both will die. You will never come back to the land you long to return to. Is this man Jehoiachin, or Jeconiah, a despised, broken pot, an object no one wants? Why will he and his children be hurled out, cast into a land they do not know? Oh, land, 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 hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. Record this man as if childless. This is Jeconiah talking about. A man who will not prosper in his lifetime. For none of his offspring will prosper. None will sit on the throne of David, or rule any more in Judah. Now, this is important. We need to pause here for a bit and explain what this means. Okay. Jeconiah, as I mentioned earlier, will be the last living king in the line of David. However, the line of David does continue beyond him. He is not literally childless. In fact, one of his descendants will be Jesus. We read at the beginning of Matthew the genealogy of Jesus Christ, and then we have this section here in the middle of this genealogy where all the kings are listed, because he comes from the kings. David was the king, and he comes from David. We get down to the list of the end of the kings, and we have, in Matthew chapter 1, verse 11, Josiah, the father of Jeconiah, actually he was the grandfather of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the time of the exile to Babylon. After the exile to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel was the father of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel will be a character we'll read about near the end of the historical books in the Old Testament. And then the line continues on from there, and it gets down to Joseph, the man who married Mary, who was the mother of Jesus. So Jeconiah is going to have descendants. He has sons. And in fact, his lineage will ultimately go down to Jesus Christ. But there will never be a king sitting on the throne and ruling as a king in the line after Jeconiah. He will be the last living king of Judah, of the line of David, until Christ takes the throne, which happened at the ascension. Now, of course, it's not a physical throne, not yet at least. Now, let me flip down this. This is a bit of a sneak preview. I'm going to flip down here to the book of Haggai. Haggai is a prophet, a priest and a prophet, who comes along after the exile, after the return to exile, and he is exhorting the people at the time to get busy in rebuilding the temple, building a new temple. And at that time, there is a man in the land called Zerubbabel. We read about him just now in the genealogy of Jesus, the grandson of Jeconiah. And he is the person in the lineage at the time of Haggai, which is the time after they came back to the land from exile. And at the end of the book of Haggai, in chapter 2, verse 20, we end the book of Haggai by saying this. The word of the Lord came to Haggai a second time on the 24th day of the month. We don't worry about the timeline just yet. We'll get to that when we get to the book of Haggai. Tell Zerubbabel, governor of Judah. He's governor. He's not king. They don't have a king. They're not independent. They're not their own. They're not sovereign any longer. But Zerubbabel is the guy. He would be king if they were still sovereign this time, but they're not. He's just a governor now. Tell Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, that I will shake the heavens and the earth. I will overturn royal thrones and shatter the power of the foreign kingdoms. I will overthrow chariots and their drivers. Horses and their riders will fall, each by the sword of his brother. On that day, declares the Lord Almighty, I will take you, my servant Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, who was the son of Jeconiah, declares the Lord, and I will make you like my signet ring. For I have chosen you, declares the Lord Almighty. So God is not done with this line of people who come from David and pass through Jeconiah. There will never be a physical king again after Jeconiah until Jesus Christ comes and becomes the king that they're all talking about. But there will be a line that will continue on down to then. And we see that guy again in Zerubbabel, who will be governor of his time. He's not king. He would have been king if they were still independent at that time, but he is not king. Okay, so that is a section about the kings, all right, or the shepherds, the rulers. Now we're going to read a section about the prophets.